Hours up across the globe, companies require knowledgeable and thoughtful leaders to evaluate and implement cloud solutions and global digital strategies. With that said, I would like to introduce our panel with moderator Craig Seidel, SVP Technology at Movie Labs, Jude Fitzmaurice, Senior Product Manager at Amazon, Lonnie Silverman, Director Client Services at Sony Pictures, Dave Lindsay, Senior Director of Product Management, Content and Supply Chain at Disney Streaming Services, Quinn Wen, Global Partner Solutions at Google Play. Over to you, Craig.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Very happy to be here. And this is a panel I've actually been looking forward to all week because it is the masters of the universe here. It's the people who have been both in the trenches and also, in terms of the broad thinking about what it means to build a supply chain that actually works and, and powers their company's needs. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I thought maybe we could do a little round of self-introduction as well. So I'm with Movie Labs. We're a nonprofit joint venture focusing on advancing technology in the movie industry. And this is part of what we do in terms of helping move things forward. Maybe Jude next.
Sure, I'm Jude Fitzmaurice. I'm a senior product manager at Amazon. I focus specifically on content rights for all of the content on Prime Video across all of our business lines.
Lonnie?
Yeah, I am with Sony Pictures in our client services division. I've actually been with the studio since 2006, before digital distribution, buying anything on any platform was even a reality. So I've seen it all and the evolution of where we started versus now. So
great. Dave?
I'm Dave Lindsay in the product organization with the Disney Streaming Services, looking after, our content media supply chain, how content gets into the Disney Streaming Services infrastructure. And prior to that, I was with the Walt Disney Studios for 6 years, also looking after digital distribution initiatives and supply chain optimization.
Quinn.
Hi, I'm Quinn Wynn, with Google Play Content Operations for the past 5 years, and focused on end-to-end avails, so avails supply chain, content features, and studio partnerships.
All right. So if you sort of look at it from beginning to end, it all starts with avails. And so we're going to talk, we're going to talk about, not what these things are, because we're going to assume the audience has some knowledge of those things already. But we really want to take advantage of our experts here to talk about what their experiences are, what works, what they are glad they did, what they regret having done, so that anyone who's coming along can benefit from their experience. And as I mentioned, it starts with avails, and the avails actually started with Sony Pictures. The original EMA avails was a spreadsheet that Sony Pictures had developed. So I'm going to start with Lonnie, and I was wondering, Lonnie, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience with avails, going from the days before to the days now, and then.
Yeah. So, in the beginning, right, when all this was new, I think like everybody, it was all spreadsheets, but there was no precedent for what we needed to provide, how we needed to provide it, what we needed to tell anybody. So we were sort of making it up as we went. And, from the business teams going, hey, well, we have to give them this, we have to give them start dates. And basically what we did was we created just spreadsheets, usually one line item, stuff going across. And that was how we did it. We were emailing, we were not in systems or anything like that. And when we were able to actually integrate with a different department, we were suddenly given a lot of engineering resources, and we had an engineering team that came in and basically took a look and said, well, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to communicate? And it really came about trying to understand what is the digital business and what's the goals. So they took a look at these spreadsheets that we had just been manually creating for, the first couple of years, and they helped us break it down and go, how can we systematize? So that was sort of the beginning of our journey towards automation, what will eventually be much more robust automation. And through that, they helped us create and envision what was the basis for the EMA, which we just lovingly, call our Sony sales communication avails. And it was a proprietary report that sort of introduced that EMA concept where you have the format definition on its own avail row. And that's what we started, and that's what we created. I think we might probably were the first in the industry to provide something like that. And it made it actually ingestible. It was an option. You could ingest this report if you had a system. So over the years, as the business needs have changed, have evolved, we started evolving that document, adding more and more columns, changing formats, depending on what was being asked, and then it morphed into the EMA. I would say that the most important achievement in being able to do this is that it allowed us to scale. We're at Sony here. We're actually a very small team for what we do, and there was no way we could have managed these manual spreadsheets on any kind of global scale. Would have been impossible. So, it sort of went from, hey, we've got these 10 sheets for 10 countries that we were manually managing, and being able to create this sort of global report allowed us to suddenly have the ability to say, oh my gosh, we can do this easily for as many countries as we want to do. So that was I think the biggest achievement in being able to create that report is scalability and more, which of course business teams love.
So for the scalability, do you have an estimate of how many avails you'll do for a major title?
We will have probably 120 countries.
And how many avails per country?
Depending on the number of retailers per country, but hundreds upon hundreds.
Big number. Okay.
Yes.
So not much fun doing by hand.
No, would have been absolutely, yeah, right. Because if you think about, every single retailer potentially in a territory all having a unique set of avails, you're talking about, depending on now, right, when we talk about all the different definitions that are being in the marketplace between SD, HD, 4K, all the different formats, between ownership and rental, right? You could have just 15 rows of data just for one title, right? And
one retailer.
Right. And so, yeah, it was, I would say, an absolute game changer between saying, hey, we have to only exist in major markets to being able to exist everywhere.
All right. So Jude, you have also been on, not only on Sony's also on the metadata as well, but Amazon has been really important in terms of both avails and metadata development. Do you want to talk a little bit about Amazon's journey?
Sure. And I also want to plus one what Lonnie said. We've seen avails in the 600,000 lines that could not possibly be managed by an individual. So having this capability really enables the scale that you need to run a global business. What makes Amazon a little bit more unique and challenging is that we offer multiple business lines. So you're not just availing one title into one business line. You could be availing one title into TVOD, Prime, channels, free, IMDb TV. So you get all these different permutations of the same title that all have different windowing and different language restrictions. So the way that you make sense of all that is utilizing an avail and being able to get the scale that you need while still managing at a granular level to know unambiguously what our rights are at any given point in time for each title in each business line. So one big thing that we've done at Amazon and kind of worked with the spec over the years is to eliminate ambiguity and make it very clear and crisp what the avail is communicating to us and what we can and can't do with that content. I remember in the beginning we would see things in an avail such as, or even pre-avails, where we get something that says, this title is licensed in LATAM. where LATAM might mean something different for Lonnie than it does for Dave. So this is one example of ambiguity that we had to iron out in the spec to make sure that everyone was aligned and kind of speaking the same language. So that's specifically our Avail story. And we also, like Lonnie, had a large group of people that were managing Avails manually. And by working with the studios that put their content on Amazon to standardize around the Avail spec, we were able to make it more machinable and make it more automated so that we can reduce our time to getting Avail updates. If one of our studio partners wants to change a date on a service, instead of providing them with a 72-hour timeline to get these changes made, we can do it within an hour. So those are some big changes that using standards and sticking to the standards have enabled us to really improve our service, both to customers but also to our studio partners.
That's pretty dramatic improvement. Quinn, now I think Google has the distinction of being the first to say you want all Avails in standard format. So I was wondering how you sort of came to that conclusion, and you also have some pretty impressive numbers about Avail's efficiency. Wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about that.
So very similar to Amazon, we used to have a very large army of operators who would receive Avails from our different content partners in many different formats and look at those Avails and try to interpret what the intention of each of those Avails were. And it took a lot of time to process those files. We didn't always get it right. Lots of issues, lots of errors, and it put the bottleneck on Google because content partners were sending Avails in and waiting for Google to do the processing and the interpretation. So it could take anywhere from a week up to a month to process an Avail file, depending on the size of the file. Not acceptable in processing new windows or new pricing changes. So we invested a lot of resources and effort into two parts. One is to work with our studio partners to agree on and adopt that EMA Avail spec. And we also invested internally on building out our tools to process Avails in the standard format and not have and give control over how quickly files are processed to the content owner and not have to wait on someone at Google to process these Avails. So we built out a portal that is external friendly partners to have 100% control over uploading their EMA Avail files 24/7 and have those updates processed as they're uploaded. So now our turnaround time on Avail's processing is within minutes versus weeks like it was before.
It sort of blows my mind that we're talking about taking a process that used to be mostly manual and had a lot of, typing errors and manual checks to make sure there weren't typing errors, and now we have it down to minutes. It's
Excel macros.
Excel macros, yes.
Well, I think, Quinn said the magic words, right? They invested in engineering and resources, right? And that's kind of, it's definitely sort of, I think, the key thing that makes the difference, right? In being able to make those changes.
So sort of to all of you, was that, you've all made that investment. Was that investment worth it?
100%.
Right. So now, Dave, don't tell them, but you're my favorite because you're using XML Avails and they're not. But Disney Streaming Services kind of went all in and not only adopted the Avail spec, but adopted the very best form of the Avail spec and also tied it into the rest of the supply chain. So I was wondering if maybe you can get some background, talk about the history of Disney and Disney Streaming Services adoption of MDDF in general and what that path was.
Sure. And probably the best place to start is where the Disney Studios kind of came into contact with MDDF. because that was a big driver for why it was leveraged for Disney streaming services as well. So in my previous roles, working in operations within the studio, we kind of came into contact with Movie Labs really by way of Google, who was advocating their partners to adopt this thing called EMA avails and component-based delivery. So that was one of the big drivers for why Disney, from an operations standpoint, really started to look at this, because we had this delivery requirement. And as we looked into it more, we started to kind of say, hey, there's some real advantages to leveraging these specifications. From an avail standpoint, it was a very manual process from our licensing team to issue these notifications to our clients, and they were prone to errors because the clients would receive these notification reports that were like Word docs or PDFs, and they would be rekeying that back into their backend systems. And when humans do things, it's prone to error. So we as a company, wanted to be more defensible around when our content was going to go live. We wanted to go live on time, not before and not after when it was supposed to. So as we kind of started to understand more about what the advantages were for programmatic avails, we really started to buy into that. And that kind of helped justify some of the engineering investments that we needed to really advocate for, from within an operations team to our studio technology team, who really wasn't too familiar with these concepts that were being advocated for in the framework. So huge change management exercises there, huge investments in technology, and really big ship to turn. Also, because the way Disney is structured, there's all these different pockets around the globe that are responsible for licensing their content separately. So huge undertaking to kind of move in this direction. Years later, the investment is still ongoing, but more and more people are aware of the benefits for this. And as we've continued that investment within the wider technology organization and the business and operations teams, more and more people got familiar and comfortable with it. And then enter 2018 or so, and we're starting to kind of look at what do we need in order to power our own subscription streaming service. And kind of the obvious choice was like looking around at what our other partners were doing at the time, and many other global partners had moved to this MDDF specification, this whole framework that does connect the rights with the content, with that whole end consumer experience. And it's really like out of the box, able to provide this whole global content experience. And also because the studio had invested so heavily and had undergone so much change management to enable these more modernized supply chain workflows, it really was kind of a no-brainer to leverage MDDF for the rights communication framework and the content supply chain for Disney streaming services, VOD pipelines, as we were standing that up. So really the drivers were to leverage the existing investments that we have made in components, component-based delivery, and programmatic rights. Other cool things that MDDF brought to the table was that it was a standard. We didn't have to develop our own standard, so it decreased kind of the time to market for rolling out our content supply chain. And it's an actively maintained standard too. So it's really deep, really rich. And we were planning to kind of go out the gate with multi-language, with UHD, HDR, multiple versions of the content, bonus content. Like we really wanted to have a very rich consumer offering because the bar had already been raised so high. So we're able to kind of take this off-the-shelf framework and start using it kind of from day one, as opposed to build up our own from scratch.
All right. So, so by the way, by attending the session, you learned little bits of MDDF trivia here. So we've already learned that Sony Pictures is responsible for the original avails. What people may not know is that Amazon is actually responsible for the core specifications. A while back, Amazon was looking internally at adopting, I believe it was common metadata at the time, and looking at media manifest, and they said, look, this is just too complicated. and our use cases don't need all this complication. Can't you just write a spec that says, cover the spec, cover the most common use cases, because that's actually all we need at this point. And it was an enormous insight, because the specs are largely complicated, and it's hard to sort of dive in and just absorb it all. And so having had the honor of initiating the simplifying specs, I was wondering, Jude, if maybe you could talk a little bit about your thoughts in terms of an OTT vendor, or platform, content supplier, whatever. How do you kind of approach the whole thing, make the internal decisions, decide on the investment, basically wrap your head about it. Wrap your head around it? What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. So what Craig is referring to is Amazon had started out using its own proprietary XML spec for delivering metadata called Amazon XML. And this was something Amazon's been around for a long time, since a product called Amazon Unbox. This was the only thing that we accepted when we were a US-only business. But as we started scaling our Prime business globally, we had to make a decision on if we wanted to continue to use that proprietary spec or transition more to an industry standard. And what we found was, especially going globally, where we have smaller local production houses, training them on a massive MDDF all the way is a giant fire hose to drink from in your first interaction with the spec and with a new company, Amazon, who's coming in to distribute in these territories. So we worked together to come up with the MEC spec and launch our global platform on the MEC spec. It enabled the pared down core aspect of it, enabled these local providers as well as all studios to get a more usable version of this. Another thing that we did was publish examples, both for movie and television, for how to use these specs. So if you are going to deliver a movie to Amazon, here's how you should do it with Avails, with MEC, with MMC, that you could, if you were just starting out, download, modify, and then send back to us to get your titles launched on the service. And then we found local studios working with their local post houses to get this implemented, and I think it saved a lot of folks time in that aspect.
Yeah, I think the concept of having any kind of samples and philosophies and guides, I would say to any content provider out there that's looking to go down this path, know your strategies, understand and know the benefits of all the different unique identifiers and where your personal stance is with that, and go through the road shows and the processes with each of your retailers before you actually implement anything and talk about it. Because it saves so much time, it saves so much effort. Any kind of update or change that we make before we do anything, we talk to all of the players. And we discuss it, and we have samples. And Jude and I were actually just hashing something out before this panel even started on something new that we want to do, right? So I think just come prepared always to the table with what it is you're trying to do, and make sure it's explicit, and always have examples of anything you're trying to do before you actually implement. Because it saves everybody a lot of time and energy.
So Quinn, you also have lots and lots of partners, some big, some small. What has helped you work with, especially the smaller ones, in terms of how to get on board with the standards and get going? Because people are out there saying, well, yeah, Google can do it. Of course they can do it. They're Google, but we're not Google. So how do we do it? And I was wondering, but the people you partner with are not Google either. So I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about how you work with them and help them on board. You're on mute. That's good. You're off.
So part of the onboarding process is educating our new content partners on our end-to-end supply chain. And a big part of that is Avails and just how to put together an EMA Avail. What we try to do at Google is follow the EMA spec and not have Google specific requirements added on top of that spec, because it just adds confusion. we want to help partners and enable our content partners to be able to provide one avail file in one standard format to Google and other retailers. Although we do have a couple of Google specific requirements, but it's 2 requirements, and we don't intend to add on more than what the spec calls for. So we do spend a lot of time with partners to understand the spec and to provide a clean EMA avail, and it's paid off. So we front load that work and that effort, and we generally see that avails that we receive from those partners going forward are of pretty good quality. There was a transition period, though, from receiving all different types of avail formats from studios to moving all of our content partners over to EMA avails. So it was whether it's it's understanding just how avails and how the avails management systems or tools for each of those partners work, and how data flows for each of those partners, and understand where we can help with data cleanup. So it was a lot of effort just around, in some instances, helping some studios just overhaul their entire avails management database and map the correct IDs to IDers or whichever IDs that they use. And so it wasn't a one-size-fit-all approach for each partner. And that's where we leveraged and built our partnerships with each of the studios to achieve that and eventually adopt EMA. So for our film avails, 100% of our film avails are EMA. So they're delivered from studio to Google in the EMA 172 format to our portal. So that accounts for over 70% of our total avail volume is automated through our portal.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was years in the making, and we have a little bit of work to do still on the TV side. 70% of our TV avails volume is in EMA format, and the remaining 30 is in EMA 1.6. So there's some work to upgrade those avails to 172. Or we have a couple of content partners who are still providing custom files, but with a plan, a path to adopt EMA 172 in the very near future. And so this has been ongoing, and we hope that in just the next several months, we would be able to report out that 100% of our film and TV avails are automated through EMA 172 avails.
That's exciting. Worthy of a press release when you get there. Also, I'm sure that, the throughput goes up when you have that as well. You can process more content more quickly and get more stuff to your customers. Yes,
it'll also enable where content partners want to expand to additional territories. We would be able to light up additional territories for those content partners very quickly because the avails portion just is automated. And we will not have the risks of offering content live at incorrect prices or too early. So it takes a lot of just that manual and operational effort out of the equation. And it's essentially a flip of the switch to light up more content.
That's great.
Quinn, do you feel that that a lot of this has been growing pains from people that had been used to using all different formats and Excel and tracking that are getting onto EMA? And once we've ironed that out, we should really only see people who are new adopting EMA and starting clean and fresh from the onset so that we won't go through this pain kind of in steady state, right?
Yes, agree. So it's with our new content partners, it's from day one as part of onboarding. They're introduced to the EMA format. This is the only format we accept. This is how you fill it out. This is what each of the columns mean. And a part of onboarding, we walk through the EMA template column by column with the studio or the content partner to explain each column. And so we do go through that process, and we see that those avails that we receive from our newer partners actually don't have any issues.
And I agree with that sentiment. I think that a lot of what we were seeing before is just bad habits developed earlier. And for those newer content providers that are out there and listening to this, even if you have 2 titles in your catalog, you should track those on an EMA spreadsheet instead of some other spreadsheet, because it will help you, kind of continue to engage and build the right habits and build that kind of a process that's really easy to transition once you start working with retailers and such.
All right, so Dave, you have a top to bottom approach with you have a top to bottom approach with MDDF, right? You have everything from avails. You've got media manifest. You have recently you added assets. Asset status, right? Some of the asset ordering and delivery specifications. Can you describe, maybe talk a little bit about some of your implementation experience having done so? Because you've also done bonus and extras and a bunch of other stuff in there too.
Sure. I do want to caveat it by saying that we kind of have a bit of a luxury, because the Disney Plus product, it's a single content partner providing material into that, whereas like Google and Amazon have to deal with hundreds of other content partners that all have to be onboarded into these specifications and managed, and go through that rollout process. So I have to deal with a far fewer stakeholders as it pertains to getting this up and running. It's still a lot of stakeholders internally, but from an actual establishment of these pipeline standpoint, I consider myself a bit lucky compared to some of the people who have to enjoy all that fun.
You still have former Fox and ABC and a bunch of different internal partners.
Yeah, but fewer. So we have more control over the way in which data comes into the underlying platform. But that was actually one of the decisions, is to leverage these frameworks for our own internal communications. So we're passing stuff through as if it is a separate platform. But that's how we're able to make sure that we have consistency in the deliverable and scale out, so that we have the post-production facilities that are pumping out packages are all able to kind of speak in the same cohesive language. So I guess, Craig, to your question of some of the implementation choices that were made, I guess some of those I just kind of spoke to. We did want to have this common reference format, so that we could leverage an existing network of providers and service providers who are familiar with it, that spoke MDDF already, because a lot of content's got to get into the ecosystem, and don't want to reinvent the wheel there too. Some of the decisions that were made kind of early on architecturally was that anything that is playable, discretely playable, would be its own manifest, its own package, and that allowed us to again distribute work out from a supply chain standpoint, so that we could have bonus coming in alongside features and not have to kind of put everything into one package. We also broke artwork and metadata out as its own discrete package, as opposed to putting everything into one manifest. That again has also allowed us to have separate pipelines for artwork and metadata, which is different teams and moves at a different pace and has a different content lifecycle than, say, the AV packages. So we looked at this from how do we really embrace components, and how do we align that component-based methodology with the content lifecycle that's going to really kind of be the centerpiece of the Disney Plus product. So breaking that content into its discrete units and having a way to get that content, in as quickly as possible. Bonus material, like I said, is its own discrete package, and we've also made the decision to separately identify that content as well as communicate the rights and availability for that content. So it allows us to position features and bonus and trailers, basically, again, any playable media with a lot of precision around rights, what can surface in which territory based on rights or based on even programming decisions, are all able to be articulated by the way of the relationships in MDDF by saying this territory has this availability, go ahead, light up this content in these languages. And let's see, the latest thing that we have rolled out within our supply chain is delivery status. So being able to communicate back to our fulfillment partners and our ordering systems, like, did the content get there? What is the status of that content as it moves through the downstream processing and publishing pipelines? That's really kind of what my roadmap is focused on, is programmatically returning data upstream so that we can be better about identifying where there's bottlenecks and remediating and actioning those, and empowering operations teams to focus their efforts in certain areas that do require some attention. So that implementation is ongoing, but we released our MVP of that one in July, and we're now reporting back the status of content acquisition to our upstream partners, so that they know that they didn't just drop something off on like a landing pad and walk away from it. They know, like, did it get through to a success state or not, and do they have work to do? So looking to continue to build out that interface more to apply that to other downstream actions. But the benefits there really are taking us again out of those manual steps, remediation, emails, messages. Nobody does phone calls anymore, so it's like Slack messages and emails and Jira tickets. So trying to get away from all that so that systems can talk to systems. That's where we're hoping to take things.
All right. So if I understand correctly, by the way, I'll put in a little ad for Disney Plus. The Mandalorian has some excellent bonus material on filmmaking. One of them on virtual production. So if anyone's interested in virtual production, I recommend it. But there's, I think, 6 of them or something like that. And so you're saying that because they're separately managed, you can have a different start date for each. If you hadn't put them all up there, you could stage them and say every week you add another piece of bonus material. That's within the capabilities of what you're doing. Is that right?
It does allow for us to continue to add supplemental content to we call it a title detail page, as we potentially maybe want to highlight something some week and say, here's new bonus content, and light up additional bonus content. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say they're going to send you the files associated with it and whatever localization and so forth. And I don't know if those in particular are dubbed, but let's say it was, for argument's sake. They want to know if the dub is there and if it's okay. They can status that, right, based on the Disney streaming will tell Disney if something came in mangled or something. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll talk to the other side of the company and say, yeah, they'll say,
but you don't have to pick up the phone and do that now, right? The system will do that. Okay.
Yeah.
And Dave, I want to clarify, so you actually are availing as well in the EMA each of those bonus contents as well?
Yeah, that's
so
correct.
It's going to EMA.
Yeah, we're treating anything playable as kind of like that first class citizen primary content. And it was a big, again, kind of change management undertaking for our teams that frankly didn't have to manage stuff down to that level of granularity before. This extra content is now something that people are actively pursuing and managing as if it, is on the level of feature.
I'm drawing attention to the chat. Looks like Kelly Boucher chimed in and said she's going to want a demo. So I'm gonna make sure. And also, actually, as long as I'm paying attention to the chat, FYI, Craig, Dave wants to know if you're going to rebrand the EMA as the OTT.X fails.
No.
Okay. There's your answer, Dave.
So
I actually think that's one really interesting case that Dave brought up, and we haven't talked about it much on this conversation, is about how these specs and standards actually impact the customer experience. And I think that thinking about bonus material is one way that you can, by thinking through the specs in a really positive way, you can really impact the way customers engage with detail pages. On Amazon, we still do for episodic content. You'll have episode 1, 2, 10, and then episode 101 or 102 is going to be your trailers and such. And that was a simplifier that a lot of streaming platforms took to get out the door. And now, through the development of specs and standards, some of the more recent EMA Avail improvements, there's better ways to associate bonus materials to features and to television episodes and such that enable us to really deliver scalable, impactful customer experiences. So that is another way in which the specs and standard development can really make a positive impact on customers, and it sounds like Disney has done that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Sony Pictures is actually one of the pioneers of the bonus material too. Rich Berger did a lot when he was there. Actually, before we get there, Dave, I wanted to ask you one other question. So you tied things together. You have to tie the bonus content to the feature and so on and so forth. How do you do that?
That's a really good detailed question. So we'd actually make use of the content ID, which is pretty powerful. It's the ID for people who aren't totally familiar with it. It's in the avails, and it's supposed to refer to like the metadata, but we apply it at the kind of like, this is the title level identifier, not quite the ITER one, not quite the ALID, but it's like this kind of in-between piece that allows us to say, here is stuff that relates to kind of this artwork and metadata experience, and we'll associate video to that. So that's how we're leveraging that, Craig. We have a relationship to the all like the children that are part of this family, and the family being that content ID for that title. So it's a value in the avail that we're choosing to leverage, as opposed to the experience and child experiences in the manifest.
So that's fine. It was a leading question, and you took the bait, so that's good. Which brings us to the topic of identifiers. Identifiers are kind of the glue that holds things together, and it's really important in a bunch of different aspects. Sorry about the noise in the background. So Sony Pictures has actually probably been the most, I'll use the word diligent about maintaining consistent IDs, starting with the alpha very early on in the process. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about how IDs kind of fit into the whole connection between the avail and the content and everything else through your process.
It's very loaded, Craig. Oh my gosh.
You're the masters panel. You get the loaded questions.
Oh my God. Okay. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to say all this.
Or maybe you can start by just talking about, how the alpha works its way through the whole process or something.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So we ended up sort of, I don't know if it's that we got lucky or that we just had people so much smarter than me, thank God, doing this sort of that led us to here. But Sony's concept of the alpha, basically the name of an edit, we had, we name every, sorry, there's an earthquake happening in here. We name every single edit of everything with a unique name, which led us to create unique identifiers already attached to it long before ITER was even in inception. So we were able to sort of start to classify by edit and by territory and everything, all of the different possibilities and iterations that could come when doing a title. In addition to that, when digital became integrated in terms of our systems, we also created concepts of version groups, which actually is what led us to being able to come up with an appropriate ALID for the industry. And Craig, you spent how many hours in a room debating this with me and my team last year? Poor Craig. But honestly, without that wouldn't have happened. So we honestly...
Sorry.
I want whatever smoothie they're making or whatever they're doing. I really do. So we ended up just at Sony overall, just constantly taking a look at what point in the hierarchy needed to have some kind of identifier and for its usage. So even before the concept of title ID, we already had an internal Sony ID that we call an NPM, right? And essentially they act as the same way. And they all have different uses depending on what it means. You know, we have assets that tie to an overall title. We have financing that ties to these overall IDs. So we had already, as a studio, proactively started creating all of these different things, which ended up leading us to be able to formulate what it needed to look like so that we could tie that into an avail, to the metadata, to the MMC, MECs, that linked it all together. So, you know, I think we adopted Amazon's, you know, phase one approach. I think like everybody else did early on, right, when we started using the IDER 2 across the board. But we've branched out since then to try and think about how we can more adhere to what all of the different identifiers are actually supposed to do. So, and move forward with that. So we've been proactive, and, you know, we know that every single, and this is where I say, like, we're all using the same standard, but everybody has their own needs. We know Google has their own needs. We know Amazon has their own needs depending on the system. And our goal is to be able to go, okay, based on all of these identifiers that we have, what are we trying to use and tie into? Do we have to create something new for a retailer? If we can, then fine, we're still going to tie it back to whatever exists. But it has sort of allowed the appropriate tracking that, again, everything starts with an avail, right? Where you have a title for a territory. Great. How do you know what alpha is supposed to be in there? You know, and where do you tie it into, right? So we built a system that basically said we have a title IDER, and then we have this particular version for a territory. Great, that has an identifier. Then we have an edit that goes underneath that. Then from there, we have the identifiers that all go under the edit. And all of that's tied to avails, which is tied to the MEC, MEC. So all of the linking that has to happen can happen fluidly and seamlessly, hopefully, on the retailer side.
Yeah, I think Sony Pictures has done an exceptionally good job of understanding what something is and then identifying it. And because you have that kind of discipline and know what for example, if you're offering something, you know what that offer is and you can identify it and so forth. I think you've had an easier time than some of being able to generate an avail, because sometimes the ambiguity comes in the avail because of ambiguity of not really knowing exactly what the offer is. So the hard part of the avail first is understanding what the offer is, and then encoding it is easier once you have that.
And it really depends on what overall the release strategy is in terms of titles and versioning for your studio. You know, we don't have the same, you know, suite of things that other studios have in terms of what, how we release edits and content. So I would say to any content provider, really looking and analyzing that in terms of how many different versions of a title are you releasing and with bonus content, and really figuring out where is the appropriate identifier needing to go when you have all those different iterations. And so that was very, very, I mean, Sony, because of our concept of alpha, we've had maybe an easier time of really being able to create and identify what those identifiers need to be. And also, it also gave us the flexibility, right, to provide Amazon, unique SKU IDs that they needed for their systems and things like that. So we're a huge, huge believer right now in having what I call the real ALID. It's not true. It's just, it's what the ALID is supposed to be, as opposed to having a substitute, which is, I think, a lot of what we're still using. So we put like I said, Craig knows, we put a lot of energy into defining that. And Google's actually the first, I think, retailer that's going to be taking Sony's ALID. So we're excited about it.
This is the global ALID?
Yeah.
The elusive global ALID?
It's territory agnostic, and we think it's awesome. We're really excited about it.
Global ALID is the only ALID.
For those who aren't familiar with the term ALID, it stands for Logical Asset ID, and it's really the most essential identifier in the avail. But it's a non-trivial concept, and I can't tell you how many hours we have been talk about ALID. There is some stuff on the Movie Lab site. There's a couple of video in the class section about identifiers in general and ALID in particular. And actually, in the last section, I did the Happy Meal analogy for those who have seen the Happy Meal.
I was really hoping you were going to give us the Happy Meal analogy.
You should have gone to the last session. Although I have a version of the Happy Meal and also on the site. So we're approaching the end. We have about 4 minutes left, and 4 of you. So maybe each of you can spend about a minute talking about what you would like to, what you would wish you could have told your former self, about what you would do differently or do the same, based on what you've learned since you started this whole thing. So maybe start with Lonnie.
Oh my goodness, I was hoping I'd
Okay,
be
we'll
last.
start with Quinn.
I just talked.
Quinn, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So we're just about done migrating to a new system, our next gen system, done with film, and we're getting ready to close out TV. And what I would say is, don't deprioritize TV after film. TV is just as important, has its own complexities. Think about TV, consider TV at least when you're coming up with a plan and solution for movies, because you want to make decisions that will enable you to support TV in a good way later on and not back yourselves into a corner with decisions that you make that won't work for TV later.
That is a good one. All right, Dave, let's do you.
Totally echo what Quinn said. TV is just, it's a beast. Start with the hardwood, rip the Band-Aid off. Kind of on that vein, I think thinking back on the past couple of years, I probably would have told myself, be more bold, and with more conviction, as what the right thing is to do, but you just need to kind of quit dancing around all the other little political aspects or the business challenges. Just make the case and tell anybody who will listen about it, who won't listen about it. Just get through this, because this can be such a drag. It takes so long to get there. That was, I think, the big challenge, is just trying to kind of do this within a huge organization. So it really does need an advocate. Need someone to really kind of fight for it. So I think I've told myself to, just pour some gasoline on it, and maybe it would have gone faster.
All right. Jude?
For me, I would say to make sure to prioritize the interfaces with your studio partners first. If you have to take on tech debt, take it somewhere else internally, but make sure you get your integrations with your studios done correctly first, and vice versa for studios and retailers, because it's a little bit like you said, it's a slow boat to turn when getting people to comply to new specs. So the sooner you figure that out and swallow that pill, even if you don't fully support it internally yet, you're at least getting people moving to that right direction, and then you get your internal stuff figured out first. I think that's a big learning, especially when you're dealing with external interfaces versus internal problems. Deal with the external ones first, because they're harder to manage later.
Good advice. Lonnie?
Yeah, I echo what Jude said, and I think that, first of all, constantly asking for help and knowing what resources to go to and get to are important. I would say be very careful creating Band-Aid solutions that have no longevity, because we're in an environment that there is no precedent for. We're all making this up together and making up this industry together as we go along. It's a privilege to be able to pioneer an industry, but it also comes with the fact that nobody can ever get too comfortable where we're at. And so creating an environment that can be agile to the needs of the business, investing in resources, and again, avoid Band-Aid solutions that are only going to get you through either a few months to a year, because it's really hard to maneuver off of those very small solutions. so I think it's better to take the time to understand, like, what is the bigger picture? How do you future-proof possible changes? And I think that is just what really helps in the long run, because I'm just going to quote, the head of my team. It's a phrase that we've been saying. She's been saying it to me since we started, is we're all building this plane as we're flying it. We're not landing. We're not taking the time. We're literally just adding on. And so always keep that in mind.
That's great. So to that, I will add, be patient, because it's going to take longer than you think, but be deliberate and keep moving forward because it's worth it. And with that, I want to thank the panel. You guys have been great. This has been a great way to end the workshop. And thank you for participating. Thank for people who are attending. And if you want to view it again, the recording will be available. So enjoy the rest of the OTT.X event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Craig, for hosting us.
Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
One.
Bye.